por dos personas que han colaborado en la parte de filosofía de la comparación. Uno de ellos es Kirk, profesor de la Universidad de San Luis, que no solo sirvió de director conmigo planificando el libro, sino que además escribió la introducción, que es una especie de filosofía de por qué en la introducción, si alguien la lee, lo que dice más o menos es que los principios contables ya estaban hace muchos años. Ya en el libro de Pacholi, incluso antes, podía haber principios contables que se difundieron en el mundo, y en la introducción se ve claro cómo esos principios son de ida y vuelta, es decir, se fueron al otro mundo y luego volvieron, se fueron a América, o se fueron a Asia, o se fueron a Australia, y luego volvieron. Eso por parte de Kirk. También he intervenido yo creo que es el primer capítulo, hablando del marco conceptual y la convergencia del marco conceptual. GARVEY, que es profesora de la Universidad de Alcalá de Henares, ellos dos tienen entonces la primera intervención, que se llama Marco conceptual, una revisión, y el problema de los principios versus frente a las normas, que caracteriza buena parte de la discusión entre las NIF y los principios contables norteamericanos.
Many thanks for that kind introduction. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. It's up to me to set the ball rolling, or to start that walk today that we've started, that Peter spoke about earlier on. So I'm going to speak about philosophy and rules and principles and things like that, so you can sit back, relax, enjoy, and later on, if you want to open up the debate, well, that's fine. When we were developing this book, we spoke about accounting philosophy, and the question that I propose here is, are we in a position to speak about accounting philosophy? In other professions, like legal profession or the medical profession, it's quite easy to talk about philosophy in that area. But in accounting, we don't really hear about philosophy very much. In an article in the Accounting Review, one of the major academic journals in the US, in the 1950s, there was an article by Professor Engelman that asked this question: can we speak about accounting philosophy? And I think really at this stage we can talk about accounting philosophy. I mean, we have a base theory, we have schools of thought, we can ask questions, we can say how, why, when, where, what is happening, where are we going from here, what is the future? So I think we really do need to consider that this profession has a philosophical side to it as well. We could, if we follow the road of philosophy, we could talk about the creation of schools of thought. Now, how do those schools of thought come about? Well, I mean, really they come about because of the necessities of the economic position in every country at every particular time. So this means that perhaps every country in particular could have its own school of thought or its own accounting philosophy. As the economy progresses and we become more globalized, well then countries begin to group together, and then we begin to talk about philosophy or schools of thought that make up regions. I mean, we could take the example of the European Union, for example. We have, when we propose the European Union, and we propose a school of thought in order to try to harmonize the schools of thought of accounting between all those countries, at least to obtain a minimum between all the countries involved. So then we become to talk about a philosophy of regions, if you like. So then we can, enter into that philosophy of thinking, well, is this the right road? Is this the way we're doing it correctly? Should we go one way? Should we go the other way? Etc. Okay, just to think about those schools of thought, I mean, it's not the same for one country to establish an accounting school when the major part of that financial information that they're producing is simply produced for government control. Okay, so in countries that have a lot of government control, well, maybe the school of thought is produced simply in order to control the payment of taxes. Okay, or maybe it's simply developed in order to control the economy. In countries where we don't have a lot of multinational companies, where in countries where the major companies are, or 95% of the companies are small and medium-sized companies, well, we're not looking to provide a school of thought to provide information to shareholders and investors. What are we looking for? We're looking for information to provide perhaps to the lenders of finance that are financing those companies in particular. And then we have the school of thought, that's the one that we're going to be dedicating more time today, is the one that produces a high quality financial information so that users can take efficient decisions in dealing with the financial information. Now, we could enter more and we could go into each one of these systems and we could ask philosophical questions like why, where are we going from there, etc. Okay, but let's situate ourselves a little bit where we are now. Okay, so in the last years, the economy has become more complex, it's become more globalized. We've had, in the case of the accounting schools, if we want to then narrow them down to the two that we're going to mention today, which is the FASB accounting school and the IASB. Why has the convergence of these two schools come together? Well, basically due to globalization. Why? Because at the moment, for example, in the IASB, we have about 138 jurisdictions using IASB standards around the world. Okay, this is enormous. We've really come very far in a very short amount of time. And then we have the FASB, which is one of the economic powers of the world. A lot of power in relation to the accounting schools of thought. Okay, so what has happened here? In companies that wish to progress, well, they want to get involved in other economies. They want to have stock exchange quotations in other companies, in countries. They don't want to have to spend their time developing complex financial accounting reports. They want to make it as simple as possible. Okay, so one of the principal things we've had here is that, companies were asking for the use of the IASB standards in other countries around the world. Okay? Initially in the US, they achieved to be able to present them using IAS standards, but they had to provide this reconciliation between the international standards and the American system. Then we went a step further, and in that step we arrived at where the reconciliation is not necessary, which has been a very giant step really in this. And then we've come to the point where, well, why don't we unite the two schools and not to have, one perhaps set of global standards, which would probably be, a fantastic objective and a fantastic achievement if we could do that. But it's very difficult for these two organisations that have a lot of power to actually say, oh, I'm stepping back and we'll give just one particular global set of standards. Okay, but they did reach an agreement, and they reached the agreement that, okay, let's try to converge. Okay, so let's eliminate our differences and improve the standards in general. Okay, so the idea is that if we use IASB or we use FASB, at the end we're going to obtain the same objective. Okay, one of the objectives is the objective of the conceptual framework in itself. Okay, maybe just to position ourselves, we should talk about what is the conceptual framework. Well, the conceptual framework basically is, as its name indicates, a frame, a guide that's there in order to allow or to guide the preparation for the standard setters for all new standards that are coming into place. Okay, so we use the conceptual framework in order to prepare the new rules or the new guides. Okay? This in itself, well, what it tries to do is to guarantee that all the new standards that are coming into place will have that base from the conceptual framework. Okay? If we talk about what is the objective of the conceptual framework, it says it's to obtain the objective of financial information. And what is the objective of financial information? It's to provide information about the entity that will be useful to present and future investors, lenders and other creditors in order to take decisions relating to the movement of financial resources of the entities. Okay? So that's our objective in the conceptual framework, and every guideline or every rule or every idea that's prepared from that point must be based on the conceptual framework. However, the conceptual framework does not override the new standards or the new guidelines. Okay, so it's very easy to talk about this in a theoretical way. Okay, in a practical way, it's more difficult, okay, because you have two groups, each have their own opinions, they each have their own story. So in order to obtain an agreement, we do need to have a lot of give and take in this. This means I give here, you give there, I take here and I take there. This helps us to develop this. Now, if we go in and talk or analyse a little bit more the difference of the FASB and the ISB, if we look at the FASB, we have every reason to believe that the FASB began as a principle-based accounting system. Okay, why? Because the first professional accountants that went to the US went from the UK. And those in the UK were following principle-based system. Okay, so let me explain just what is a principle-based system. The principle-based system is basically the following. Okay, it has one overall objective. At the moment, the objective is to give a fair representation of the financial information, in summary. It develops, or we arrive at that objective by using principles. Through the principles, we develop guidelines, okay? Guides, accounting standards, not rules, okay? The guidelines are open, they're flexible, okay? So this means that it doesn't provide a solution to all the problems. This means that we have a weight on the accounting professional that is involved here. We have a weight on the financial directors and the auditors involved. They have to decide. And they have to decide taking into account the guidelines that are based in those standards. That is principle-based accounting. Now, we could ask, if we say that the American system did begin as a principle-based system, well then what happened? Okay, because as time has gone by, the American system has become a more rules-based system. Okay, and let me just stop to explain what is the rules-based system. Okay, the rules-based system is, they have an objective, but that objective is obtained by following the rules. The rules are very detailed. So this means that when we're preparing financial information, we must look through the literature for the correct rule, or the correct situation. What happens here is that when new situations come up, we have the situation where, the rule doesn't cover this. So what do? What we do is we introduce an interpretation, or we introduce a new rule so that it is covered. So what happens here is that we have a build-up over time of a huge quantity of accounting literature that when we prepare the financial statements, we have to be familiar with, and we have to go through in order to find the correct solution to the problem. All right? So, we'll talk about the reasons why the US maybe went towards a more rules-based system later, but the proposal in the last years is that in the US they have been thinking, well, it is true that we have this rules-based system. Maybe we should be trying to go nearer to a principle-based system, okay? But that's not easy. It's not easy when you have lots of years of history with rules, okay? Change is very difficult for anyone. It requires a change in mentality. It requires a change in the education system. So it's just not that easy to change from rules to principles overnight. Then we could ask, which is the best system? Okay, of course, I'm not going to say which is the best system in a conference here in the St. Louis University. But we will talk about what we consider are the advantages and the disadvantages of each of the systems. I truly believe that it's like the president of the country or the prime minister or whatever. You get the one you deserve. You get the one that you've worked towards. So if you have a country that's developing their accounting system, well, they don't develop it unless there's a certain amount of manipulation, but normally it's developed because of the necessities of the economy at the time, okay? So normally it works towards that, okay? At the moment, we're debating this because of the globalization in the economy, basically. Okay, so let's examine, some reasons that we could, say for rules-based accounting. The first one there says that financial statements are easier to audit for compliance purposes. Okay, what does this mean? Well, this means that when the auditor goes into the company to do their audit, they go through how the rules have been adopted. Have they been adopted correctly? Yes or no. Okay, so the procedure of control is quite easy. Okay, we could say that this system provides a vision of the trees, but not of the global picture of the forest. Okay, and this perhaps, it's here in the for section, but we could debate that in the section of against. It talks about having more consistent and comparable financial reports. Well, if all companies that have the same situation or the same problem, well, they have to find that particular point in the rules. Okay, so they're going to use the same one. If they're doing it properly, they're going to do the same one. And that will be consistent among the different companies, and it will also make that information more comparable between companies. Other reasons for the for rules-based accounting are that it facilitates supervision and compliance. A little bit like the audit. It facilitates the audit. It also facilitates the control. Have you been doing what you're supposed to do according to the rules? And then the last one, this is not an exhaustive list, okay, it's just to mention, to open up the ideas for the rest of the day. And then the last one here is there's less fear of litigation in the rules-based concept. At least that's what's out there, okay, that's the idea, the concept that is out there. Probably this is one of the principal reasons why the US system has changed from a principle-based to a rules-based. Because they feel, well, if I follow the rules, I'm clear. I don't have any fear. Okay, and we could debate that, all right? But Some of the reasons then against the rules-based accounting system might be that it becomes a very automatic, mechanic type of system. They call it here the box-ticking exercise. Okay, so the auditor goes in, he has 100 questions, and he ticks the box, compliance or not compliance. Okay, so it's reduced, if you like, to a box-ticking exercise. Okay, this is fine if you want it to be a box-ticking exercise. There's little room for flexibility to facilitate the incorporation of future developments in the economy. Okay, it tends to be rigid because it's dealing with every particular point at the time. When we have new changes, then there's not room to introduce those new changes in the rules. We have to create new rules. Other reasons against, we can have centering too much on detail of the rules ignores the requirement of obtaining the economic reality. But this is a little bit what I said earlier on about, you know, seeing the trees but not the forest, okay? So sometimes the rules, by complying with the rules, takes away the whole full vision of the financial position of the company. As happens in most areas, the preparers can look for loopholes. Okay, so they examine the rules in a lot of details and they try to find the gap. Maybe I can go this way, okay, and then I can introduce what I'm looking for there. One of the examples that has been introduced there is with lease accounting, whereby, you know, one of the advantages was to include it directly in the profit and loss account as an expense, but then because it was going to be your asset at the end, well, the accounting profession said, no, this can't be right because it's not showing the economic substance. Therefore, we must include this as an asset. Okay? And we have lots of literature and we have lots of rules on this in the US. However, it's surprising that if you examine the lease transactions in the US, you'll find that there are very few of them actually shown as an asset on the balance sheet in the US companies. Okay, so let's have a look then at some of the reasons for principle-based accounting. Okay, one of them is that it's simpler and there's less volume of standards. Okay, as I said before, they're guidelines. So you have the guide and then you take the guide and you make your decisions. Broad guidelines make it possible to apply them in many different situations. So we have that flexibility in the principle-based system. This means that when new areas come in, well, we already have that base, so we can apply the new situations to the base. One of the reasons for principle-based accounting, then, we have that it allows the professional judgment by the accounting professionals to decide on the substance of the operations. Okay, this could be considered a disadvantage, okay, because if we take professional judging, perhaps we're taking more risk. Okay, but I do believe that by giving professionals judgment, we are giving more prestige to the accounting profession, okay? We're giving them more importance. We're saying, you have a preparation behind you, you've got to this point, you can apply the guidelines, and now you can make the decisions. It's like when you go to a doctor and you have a problem. The doctor gives you a diagnosis and tells you, you can go this way or that way. If you go this way, it has disadvantages and disadvantages. If you go this way, you have these advantages and these disadvantages. If you go to your professional accountant, you examine the options, the professional gives their advice, you can go this way or this way, advantages and disadvantages for each one. Okay? So as I say, once again, that can be interpreted in two different ways. It can be an advantage or a disadvantage. Reduction in the manipulation of the rules, okay, or the guidelines or whatever. This is a point that they mention that, you know, because we have so little rules or so little guidelines, well, really, there's less room there for manipulation as well. Some reasons against the principle-based accounting system might be the lack of precise rules or guidelines could produce unreliable and inconsistent information and make comparability more difficult. Okay, obviously, we have a number of professionals, many options. For a similar situation, each professional may be going a different way. This is clear that we're not going to have the same comparability. Where preparers and auditors have to use their professional judgment, the question could be raised as to whether they have sufficient guidance to correctly do this. Okay? This is a point against if we don't confide in the accounting profession. I mean, if we confide in the accounting profession and we know that the professionals have had a good training, that they have the ability to actually make those decisions, well then, in some ways, we're not going to question their professional judgment. We're going to confide in, okay? Once again, bringing back the medical profession. If you have a problem, you go to someone who's a specialist, who you confide in, who knows about this. So, once again, the training of professional accountants is fundamental if we want to use a principle-based accounting method. Just then to open up some ideas that have been mentioned in relation to the rules-based standards, we had the chair, Robert Hurst of the FASB, mentioned that the current rules-based system is problematic because those who want to comply with rules are not always sure of everything they need to look at. Those looking to get around the rule can use legalistic approaches to try to do that. Okay, so this is a comment in Business Week coming from Robert Hurst. Okay, we identify effectively that the mentality or the process of thinking is that we need to move away from rules and we need to get to principles. One of the important things that he mentions in this comment is to comply with the rules. You know, professionals are not always sure of everything they need to look at. I mean, the quantity of literature and accounting rules that we have now is just enormous. So, if you've missed page 500 and you've got to page 499, but the answer to your question is on 501, well then you have a problem because you've missed it. Okay, so this is just to show you, you know, some of the comments that have been made. The former SEC chairman, the Security and Exchange Commission, Harvey Pitt, said that because standards are developed based on rules, they are insufficiently flexible to accommodate future developments in the marketplace. This has resulted in accounting for unanticipated transactions that is less transparent. Okay, this brings up the issue again of that lack of flexibility in the rules-based system. Okay, and once again, it's a comment made by the former SEC chairman. Once again indicating that in the US we came to a point where they began to question whether the rules-based system was the correct system to continue with. And in fact there is a document from the SEC to the FASB where they do propose that perhaps they should try to get to more objective orientated principles in the accounting information. Now, the next comments are by Sir David Tweedy. Sir David Tweedy is the ex-president of the IASB. Okay, and before you read his comment, I should let you know that Sir David Tweedy is known for his being a little bit outspoken, for his wit, okay, in his comments, okay. He says here, if we won't get principle-based standards if several things happen. Okay, firstly he says, if people cheat, okay, so what he's saying is that if there's an intention to manipulate, then principle-based accounting just won't work. Okay, more or less he repeats the same in the next two ideas. If they jump out of the sand pit and run naked around the beach, we'll stick them back in the sand pit by putting rules around it. Okay, so if someone misbehaves, well then how do we control that? We control it by putting rules. Okay, so in some ways to allow that principle-based procedure to continue, we need once again to be able to confide in the accounting profession and that when there is fraud, because there'll always be fraud, that they are the exception rather than the rule. Okay, so he mentions here at the end, so give us a rule so we're safe. Okay, people find safety in rules. If I apply the rule, that's out of the way. I've done it, I don't have to think now whether the overall position is correct or not. The point he makes at the end is that principle-based accounting is that people will have to accept that we're not going to tell them the answer to everything. Okay? So they have to use the professional expertise to get there by themselves. And he also mentions here, so the accounting profession really has a big choice to make. And I think that if it doesn't make the right choice, it is doomed to become a little more than a profession of box tickers, the search engine profession. Okay. Obviously, Sir David Tweedy is very much inclined to the principle-based. He focuses very much on the simplicity of the guidelines and on the expertise of the professional. But this comment is interesting to think about. I mean, as an accounting profession, do we want to just know the content of the rules and go in there and say, is it applied or is it not applied? Okay, it's an interesting point to make. Okay, I have prepared the first chapter in this book called Filosofía Contable, Comparación entre los marcos conceptuales de IACB y FASB. If you'd like to read more on the philosophy of the two systems, you can read it there. Okay, and then I'm going to give over the microphone to my colleague, Professor Tennant.
Good morning, my name is Kirk, and I do promise that this is the last pure English session you have to listen to, okay? So anyway, I was thinking about this presentation, and I was a graduate student in 1973 as the FASB came into existence and replaced the then Accounting Principles Board. And luckily, I had taken the CPA exam before, so I had memorized all the APBs, and I didn't have to memorize any of the subsequent standards, which probably today, most of you probably know more than I do about those standards. Anyway, I was responsible for an introductory chapter of this our text, and what I got out of it was that, or at least what I put in, was that the propagation of the Italian school of accounting occurred maybe for one of two reasons. Either because commerce increased and there was a need for accounting, or there was accounting and that helped commerce. It all depends on whether you're looking at it from a chicken or an egg perspective. I sort of argue, at least in the book, that accounting, the Italian school, chased commerce. As commerce went to other places, then wasn't very long to the, at least the Piccoli ideas followed very closely. There is a book that I do recommend by, other than ours, by Gleason White, who entitled her book, Double Entry, How the Merchants of Venice Created Modern Finance, and it is quite an interesting read. So if you get a chance, I don't think it's out in Spanish. I think whatever conclusion you reach and draw from accounting history, it's clear that there has been a deep and long-lasting, I call it symbiotic, relationship between commerce and accounting. Okay? So I also put up the word healthy, so we'll explore that. Ian was mentioning a couple of those. All right. Bring something. So what I want to do today is evaluate the current accounting standards from 4 perspectives. The relationship of accounting standards to our current understanding of economics. Anne mentioned this, and it's very important that using a system-based, whether it's rule-based or principle-based, from an accounting system that was developed 500 years ago doesn't clearly incorporate our current modern understanding of economics. And so I'm going to argue that, as Anne said, we should be doing that. I also want to talk about the accounting standards in relationship to corruption. Okay? And I noticed Anne said, or had a statement by Tweedy. And it was, if people are going to cheat, it doesn't matter what system you have, right? And I also teach moral philosophy, so I'm kind of drawing all the time between that we all have to establish what is human nature. And I think as accountants, sometimes we have to have accounting standards that overcome the propensity of human nature, which I'm pretty clear, I think, that human beings are greedy. Okay? So I think we'll talk about whether some of our task is not to, as accountants, help people get over their greed. I don't know. Maybe. Okay? Also, the ability of standards to establish a just and moral position. One of the things that Anne talked about and is out there in the literature is that it's all directed towards the user. Okay? And I find that kind of appalling. That, you know, why should we direct our standard setting just to a certain group, those users, right? Do we not have a higher calling as accountants to a larger societal perspective than what is shown? I am a CPA, and in the United States that stands for Certified Public Accountant. And my training, which is way back, was always that ultimately our rules, whether we applied rules, which we did in the United States, or principles, still has to be towards an understanding of a moral society. Okay? And I think we've lost that somewhere along the line. Maybe not. We'll have to, you can answer those questions later here. I'm going quickly. The ability of accounting standards to adapt to non-capitalistic accounting. Now that's really, as I have observed for my 40-some years in doing accounting, it has always been centered towards a capitalistic understanding of society, and that those rules supported a capitalistic understanding. It's not clear, at least to me, okay, that the world is as capitalistic or will be as capitalistic as the Western society that much of our standards have developed from. All right. So, the question, should accounting standards reflect more contemporary economic knowledge? Just the other day, Jean Tirole was awarded the 2014 Nobel Prize in Economics. His work is centered on the market distortions that are caused by monopolistic or near monopolistic companies. All right? Observing business today, I see lots and lots of monopolistic companies. And his argument is that these distortions in the market have to be dealt with, okay, maybe by accountants, okay, or somebody measuring things, but, and I underlined his but, one size regulation doesn't fit all. So are we not moving towards convergence that will allow more companies to hide things rather than find individual solutions that by sector and things like that? I don't know. But I think we do have to bring into existence contemporary economics. I think we're ignoring it and have for maybe 500 years. Okay, should the accounting standards help mitigate? Okay, I think that the one size fits all, I'm just stating this from me, is a sellout to companies and corporations. That I can't think of anybody who would want more convergence than the companies, because then they know the rules, and whether it's principles or rules, they would know them and they can manipulate them. We get back to, do people manipulate? And at least my observation I was working in public accounting in the mid-70s, and I was working for KPMG, and I had to read, and they literally made me read a document that KPMG put out on revenue recognition, because they had had so many problems that they had to produce a document, and I had to read it, and it had every case that they had failed on and been litigated by, even though they followed the quote rules. I don't know if accountants are a higher group of people or not. I think their opinions can be bought. Does the accounting standards, as currently stated, exacerbate the market distortion? I would argue it probably does. Okay, that by coming down on one rule, that then the market, the people in the market, the companies can manipulate the distortion. Okay, another question. Should accounting standards address the issue of corporate and state corruption? Okay, and that's a big S. Okay, not the state of Utah or any other state, but the state, i.e. the whole entity. What? I don't know, because I don't do Spanish accounting, but somewhere, at least in the news in Spain, I always see somebody has received some money from some fund, right? Okay, I do know names, but but the question is, you know, where did that money come from? Okay, so maybe the Spanish auditors were using their principle-based rules, but it sure didn't work. Okay, all right, I don't know. Okay, and interestingly, you know, the IASB, the FASB have sort of tried to remain non-political, but are they really non-political? I would argue that they have given businesses way too much leeway to manipulation. So we saw back in the 17th century that the Italian framework was brought into government. Why? Because it was a method for not only better accounting, but prevented fraud and other kinds of things. Do we not have a role in preventing fraud as accountants? Okay. Next question. Should accounting standards reflect societal moral values, which should be incorporated in the IASB and FASB accounting standards? I put it to you that all the current standards, both from the IASB and the FASB, are what I call teleological arguments. They are self-contained. There is no expression that leads to understanding whether they are moral or fair, because they are what they are. Okay? And this is the same thing that happened back in Picoli's day. Okay, you remember Picoli, when he wrote his treatise, he put it at the back of the math book, first of all, right? So it wasn't even it was an afterthought, and he was placating the Venetian merchants, right? So he created it, but he didn't have any sense that what he was doing was going to lead to larger and larger elements of societal needs. I think he thought, oh, I'm going to measure that ship. I'm going to figure out how much it cost me to take it out and how much it came back. But all those other costs and things get forgotten. And so maybe we need to change our model a little bit. The accounting standards continue to beg Hume's is-ought question. Okay? I don't know if you know Hume, David Hume, Scottish philosopher, economist as well. Okay, so what he basically says is, where are you going to take your morals from? Are you going to take your morals from what is happening or what should be happening? Okay, and I would argue that the IASB and FASB, to date at least, always reflects an is perspective. Okay? What? We put out a what? Discussion memorandum. And we ask people in business, basically, is this what you really want? And they come back and they say, no. And then guess what happens? It gets changed. Okay? Versus, if we are going to really have, I think, effective accounting standards, we have to reflect the ought. I don't know how to do that. I'm up here, I can just say it. Doing it's much more difficult than everything else. All right. There's a new book by, I'm sure I can't pronounce it right, Micklet Waite and Wooldridge. These are two economists who write for, or two editors who write for the Economist magazine. All right, and one of the things that they have basically concluded, and this book is really quite good, it's called The Fourth Revolution, is so far the 21st century has been a rotten one for the Western model. That is, if we look around, the Western model has not held up its end of the bargain in other areas, maybe in the Western world, but not necessarily there. For example, I just gave one. What happens when we do Foxcom's total involvement in the life of employees? Right? They house them, they pay them, they make them work different hours and things like that. You know, yeah, we can use a Western model, but it's not, I don't think, effective in measuring what's really happening economically. All right, so, general conclusion. Oh, we're right on time. In each of the 4 areas, contemporary economics, general corruption, moral philosophy, and future non-capitalistic commerce, I think that the accounting standards, that's what shouldn't be here, do not nor will they provide the future an environment for establishing working accounting standards, especially if based on, I had to throw this in for you, man, especially if based on the current framework concepts. I don't think it'll work. Thank you. We have a few minutes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I had lots of questions, and Anne raised lots of issues, and we have hands in the back.
I'd like to ask for a question. Nowadays, is there any official calendar in order to reach a standard accounting?
A one global accounting.
Yes.
No. I mentioned earlier that this would be like the ideal. But we don't live in an ideal world. But basically, I think because we have 2 very powerful organizations involved here. We have the IASB, that's now providing accounting standards in many jurisdictions in the world, and we have the FASB that has produced accounting standards over many, many years, and neither of those organizations want to lose the control. And I think this is the principal problem, that we could go back and ask, is this an ethical issue or not? Because does it not mean more to have one set than just to have the force of the 2 powers, if you like?
Yeah, just my quick response would also be that we have to look at the IASB and the FASB as political entities. They are not out there. As I said, I was there in 1973 in university, and it was like, okay, now we have gotten rid of the APB, and we have a godsend new entity that says they're going to create standards for everybody. And the politics just didn't work. Yeah, they have all have vested interests, and that's what they do.
I have a question about the mobility. You know, I started to work in the accounting when I was 15 years old on the American system. I'm from Venezuela, and we all in South America we have the American system. Later, when for work reasons I came to Europe, my studies were not recognized, and years later I had to do them again from zero, right? And then I had chosen Spain because, of course, my mother tongue, Spanish, it was easier for me, and because I was working with a Spanish company, right? Once years gone, I had to move to Britain, but my studies from Venezuela, American system, from Spain, the Spanish system, they are not recognized. Then I had regard to obtain my qualification and to have a job that I am not working at the moment because, well, there are many reasons that I don't need to work at the moment, but I want to keep active on my area, on my profession. Then I ended again doing the courses to obtain their certification, right? Then how the university, and that's my question to you, because you are an American university here place in Spain, how you as an academic give the support to us as an accountant, public accountant, because that was the other, how to say, a very hard mental situation I had when I came to Europe, because here in Europe, any country, no country at all, use as we have in the Americas, the public accounting. They don't treat our profession as a public accounting. Then how you could help, yeah, those students here in Spain, right, to to go to that way and try to be that our profession becomes universal. It doesn't matter if there are two entities ruling as our profession, but at least through the university we will have that support that we really don't have. And I put my situation on the table for you to think how you could help us. In the case that we move, because and now and furthermore in the future, we will be forced to move because we have to go where we have a job.
Right.
Because sometimes in our country we don't have a job.
If I had it to do over, okay, which I don't, and I'm not going to do it over, I would, given the international nature of yourself, I would go for a chartered accountancy out of
Yes.
England. That is more likely to be recognized
Yes.
in the future universally. So my recommendation to the students would be that they work towards a chartered accountancy.
Exactly. That is something that here in Spain is not being offered yet.
No.
Exactly.
No,
That's
you're
my
going to
point.
have to go up.
That's
you're
my
going to have
point.
to.
Exactly.
You're
That's
going to
my
have
point.
to have
Yes.
sufficient English, and you're going to have to go up and take the
Yeah.
exams
But for example,
there.
I saw that here, sorry, there are some academics from the Universidad de Alcalá and others. UNED, I think, I don't know who they are. But I think that they maybe could work for the future to provide to the students, yeah, that focus of the public accounting and not the way how in Spain has been treated. And probably other countries in Europe will follow us, for example, in Britain, that they have their other institutions doing this through the universities.
If I just comment on that for a moment. First of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
I think you deserve a medal.
I'm very persistent.
Yes, you're a hero among us. Effectively, it's a problem. We don't live in a perfect world. It's true that Kirk mentions the Chartered Accounting Institute, but this is because it's gained the name over the time. But does that mean that it's a better professional organisation maybe than others? If we go with the market, maybe that's your best option. I think that's what Kirk wants to say. But it's not the best option, maybe. I mean, it's back to confiding. I mean, why can we not confide in the accounting profession from Venezuela? Or why can continental countries in Europe not confide in the English-based system or the American-based system? We have a gap here,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
clear. But unfortunately, that's the way it is, so we don't have many choices. But thank you for
Thank
the
you very
comment.
much.
Other questions?
Well, it's not exactly a question. I would like to say that at the universities, it used to talk that frameworks, American and European, but European, well, at least the student, we don't have a very good access to the American rules. It's like we know that they're there, but I've tried to look for information, exactly the rules for special things that I have been studying, and it was almost impossible to find information that the rule, I mean, just to read the rule, how is the American way to see that. In Europe, for example, here in Europe, the rules in Europe, you can find it very easy. It's like, I need the intangible, and it's exactly, it's so fast. It's so fast. You can see everything just to read it, and I don't know why is that problem we had with the financial rules here.
From being an American and having to discuss this sometimes, the recent codification of the American rules has really helped. Anne was talking in her presentation about having to look through those 2,500 pages. I, many days, looked through all 2,500 pages looking for the facts. Now the codification leads to subject areas. So everything written about those subject areas. Now access. You know, this is America from an American perspective. So it's going to cost you, right? It's going to cost you.
I couldn't find even with, okay, you can access if you pay monthly access or something like that. It was really hard.
Well,
It's
the codification, when I teach intermediate accounting these days, I teach both with access to the American rules and to ISB. So I think that's a duty of teachers for us to try to help you along those lines. But I understand it is difficult.